Dexter, Original Sin has provided a lot more context about Harry Morgan's, Christian Slater, decision to adopt Dexter after Laura Moser's, Brittany Allen, death, but it hasn't explained why he didn't adopt Brian Moser as well. As a prequel, the timeline of Original Sin and Harry's flashbacks overlaps with some of Dexter's backstory in the original show. That means Original Sin gets to dive deeper into Dexter's origins as a serial killer and his early childhood when Laura was still alive. While the show has answered many questions about Dexter, it also raised a few new ones. Fans of the original Dexter already know that Laura Moser was killed by Hector Estrada, a drug kingpin, and that Dexter and Brian were locked in a shipping container filled with her corpse and blood for days. That traumatic experience is usually cited as the birth of Dexter's dark passenger and his desire to kill. Harry eventually found both the boys in that shipping container, yet he only decided to adopt Dexter, not Brian. Dexter didn't devote much time to explaining Harry's decision, however, and Original Sin has only started to provide a reason why he didn't adopt both of Laura's sons. Harry thought Brian was already too traumatized for him to save. Harry believed Dexter could block out Laura's murder and that Brian was too old to forget. The main reason Harry didn't adopt Brian is that he thought Brian would never recover from Laura's death. Dexter was only a toddler when he was trapped in the shipping container with Laura's body, but Brian was a few years older. Harry thought that Dexter would be able to repress the memory of her death, but that Brian was too old to do so. So, instead of adopting him and trying to raise him as a normal child, Harry thought it was best to have Brian put into a mental hospital so that they could try to treat the psychological damage from Laura's murder. Original Sin has also added a bit more nuance to Harry's decision not to adopt Brian. As Original Sin Season 1, Episode 4 proved, Brian was already exhibiting psychopathic tendencies like pulling the tails off lizards when Laura was still alive. It's possible that Harry thought Brian was already a psychopath, and that Laura's death would only make him worse, and had Brian institutionalized so that he couldn't be a bad influence on Dexter. In any case, Brian's existing bad behavior likely made it easier for Harry to believe he was too far gone to live a normal life, but Harry's decision to adopt Dexter and hospitalize Brian was also likely influenced by his own past. As Original Sin Episode 1 showed, Harry had a son named Junior Morgan who drowned while he was watching him. Junior was about the same age when he died as Dexter was when Harry recruited Laura as a criminal informant, so Harry may have viewed Dexter as a replacement for his late biological son. If that was the case, Harry may have had Brian hospitalized because he didn't resemble Junior enough. Was Harry wrong to only adopt Dexter after Laura Moser's death? Brian was likely always going to become a killer, but Harry could have helped him the same way he helped Dexter. Harry Morgan, Christian Slater, looks at dead lizards with young Dexter and Brian Moser in Dexter, Original Sin Season 1, Episode 4. Harry's decision to adopt only one of the brothers is controversial, and it's not clear whether he made the right choice. On the one hand, Brian was already showing the early signs of becoming a murderer through his torture of animals. Laura's death only made those early warning signs worse, and he would eventually grow up to become the ice truck killer. In that way, Harry was right about Brian, and he probably made the right call to not bring a psychopathic child into his home. Harry had Dexter, Doris, and, shortly after, Deborah, to worry about, and Brian's violent tendencies would have threatened them all. On the other hand, it's possible that Harry's decision not to adopt Brian is what sealed his fate. Growing up in a mental hospital couldn't have been easy for Brian, and he clearly resented it long into adulthood. In Dexter Season 1, Brian said as much to Dexter. There's no way to tell for certain, but growing up in the loving household that Harry and Doris could have provided may have been enough to keep Brian from becoming a murderer. At the very least, he could have implemented the code of Harry for both Dexter and Brian, and he could have kept Brian from killing over a dozen prostitutes. The idea of nature versus nurture has always been central to Dexter, and Brian was arguably an even better example of it than Dexter himself. No one knows who Brian Moser would have been if Harry Morgan had adopted him in Dexter, Original Sin.